Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. Apologies for those expecting this to be recorded live in about 30 minutes' time, but due to a bit of a calendar malfunction on my part, we've had to bring it forward. But anyway, welcome to today's Grain Market Blast with myself and the wonderful Angie Setzer, where Angie will be providing us with the latest roundup of latest pricing flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. But before she does, I will get the legals out the way. So as usual, nothing discussed in this spaces session constitute trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, or indeed that of myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed that of the glamorous Angie Setzer. Angie, how are you, my darling?
I'm super. I always laugh I still laugh. You can call me glamorous for the rest of our existence together.
I will.
And I'm still like the least glamorous human anyone will have met. I can tell you that much, but I like it. I mean, that's what it works. So happy Wednesday. I was like, I don't know why in my head I think it's Tuesday.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm not going to lie. When
Yeah.
you started saying Wednesday, I was a bit shocked. I was like, hang on, has she got this right?
Yeah. I don't know what day it is anymore. I just know that we come in and like stuff comes at us for 5 days and then I take Saturday to pretend I don't do this, and then Sunday comes and they get to do it all over again. So happy Wednesday. Things that I'm paying attention to today, I think one of the bigger things that the market's going to be paying attention to, and part of the reason that I feel like you've got beans up a little bit here on the overnight. So just for those of you that haven't had a chance to take a look at what the markets are doing and you're maybe a little curious, we've got corn up about 3. Beans are up about 7 and wheat is up 6, today. So still a good sort of day that we got. It does appear as though Speaker Johnson is optimistic that he's going to bring the big, beautiful tax bill to the House for a vote today. And he is optimistic that it passes. However, it looks like we've got at least 3 right now that are big no's on the Republican side. Looks like Andy Harris, Thomas Massey, and Chip Roy are all no's so far. They say the bill is no good, so we'll see what that means. And the reason that matters, typically we don't really talk too awful much about tax bills in the ag space. You know what I mean? Like obviously, like there is some effect, but it's not anything that necessarily impacts market direction. However, in this instance, this tax bill still has the 45Z changes. They have made their way through all of the hurdles. I think part of the reason that you saw the market kind of be a bit softer last week, obviously there was talk of the reduced RVOs and things like that, but there were some questions whether or not the 45Z part of the bill would make it through the weekend, because there are some Republicans that are pretty hot that their maybe green energy of choice hasn't had the same support as what you're seeing with biomass-based diesel. So of course if it passes, that's going to be one of the things that is important to pay attention to or watch. And then whether or not it makes it through the Senate, it's a whole other leap and hurdle and all of that. But that's going to be the big thing, I think, at this point is just kind of, paying attention to that and what that means for 45Z, future biofuel demand potentially. So bullet point number 1. Anything on that you've heard that you think matters at this point, tax bill wise? Okay.
No, I'm all with you on this.
But point 2, I almost forgot where I was going there. I almost said biofuel 2, which isn't proper at all. That wasn't, I don't know. Anyway, point 2, weather. Lots of stuff, and I said it at the start of the week kind of snidely, because that's just who I am as a human, is a snide sort of, about some folks need to get out of Des Moines maybe and take a look around, and that's still the case. But we are hearing more folks talking about, the Eastern Corn Belt. There's some problems and there's some real, I just actually had a conversation with a grower of mine, that, we are creeping up towards a couple weeks before you need to make some decisions with crop insurance on planting dates. You're getting to the end of the planting window. And honestly, as a grower of corn or anything like that, as you push it further into June, you really start to reduce your yield potential. And the lower your yield potential, the lower your revenue per acre. And, you get to the point of where what you're putting out there isn't necessarily going to provide you a return. You can just basically, and so that's part of where crop insurance comes into play. With prevented planting, they do provide a safety net for a grower who's battling weather. There's also replant options, if you've got, and so that's one of the things that we're looking at here, which is very agronomic, so it's very difficult, or, maybe a bit of a stretch to expect the tourists and agricultural markets and, to really kind of recognize what this all means, right? Cause it's all very complicated stuff that I barely understand. But if you get a cold rain, especially a heavy cold rain, right after planting, when your seed's still in the ground or anything like that, you can run into what I think they call it seed imbibe, or there's just issues where, it just doesn't do well. And so you've seen some big areas across the Eastern Corn Belt, that are probably going to have to make some replant decisions as well. If they're planted initially, then, they may not have good stands. And again, same sort of thing. Like if you aren't going to have a reasonably decent yield, you have to make a decision of whether you want to start over or, whatever. And now that's not anything a farmer is going to take lightly, but I do think it's a conversation that needs to be had, simply because at 452 futures, there is no incentive. A grower currently is locking in a loss, whether she, whatever, what they're looking at. There really isn't an incentive in this market to encourage you to push it. Now at 550, different sort of scenario. And that's why I think you're going to see more in the way of risk premium brought into this market, simply because we are looking at cool and wet conditions here over the next week still, in a lot of places that have been wet and cool. And then you also have issues in Europe. We've got drought conditions in certain spots that we're looking at. We have conditions in China that are less than ideal. Surface temperatures yesterday reported at 70 degrees Celsius. Now remember, that's the ground. And it is really hot.
Do you know what? That's a good point to raise, because I saw when you post that, everyone go, hang on, that can't be possible.
Yeah, that can't be right. I'm like,
and to be honest, even I was like, hang on a second.
Me too. I double checked it. If it hadn't come from the source that it had come from, I probably wouldn't have repeated it, honestly.
And to be honest, now I know the difference between air temperature and surface temperature.
Right.
Because I went down a wonderful rabbit hole on surface temperature.
Oh, I love it. I love influencing the random rabbit holes that we get to go down. And that's why, but if you think about it in the summertime in certain spots, you can fry an egg on pavement. Yeah. It is hot. And you did hear reports in Ukraine over the summer of very similarly high, surface temperatures. And one of the things that comes from that too, and are certain spots in China that just naturally, like I also went down the rabbit hole. And there are some spots in China that are just hotter. They're desert, it could be in a desert area. It doesn't necessarily mean
Gobi Desert.
Yeah, that I'm not, doesn't mean that is the wheat producing area, but that just gives you an indication of how hot it is in parts of China. Your air temperature is 105 to 110. You are impacting around 30% of the area's production, wheat production. Yeah. And so it is something that we have to really be paying attention to. I've seen some folks be like, well, China's not buying cash wheat. That must mean they're not that scared. That's the dumbest thing I've heard today. So you get the award for, being so silly. Because China, it's just ahead of harvest. The last thing China's going to do just ahead of harvest is undercut their farmers at the knees. A, we don't know what the production reduction looks like until you get it into the bin. And B, logistically speaking, that would be the dumbest thing that you could do. And so the last time China had a pretty big production hiccup, it took them 6-7 months to come into the market. And that was a whole 2 years ago, and they ended up buying the second largest amount of soft red wheat from the U.S. on record. And so just kind of take it with a grain of salt, keep an eye on it, something to be watching in a big way, because it could influence their corn as well. Also on weather, we've got the third Russian production region declaring a state of emergency when it comes to heat, dryness, frosts. Rostov is Russia's largest producer. And they declared a state of emergency. Their meteorological group expects a continuation of hot and dry conditions. And they do think that it will reduce production. Last year when Rostov had a pretty big hit, I think they had a late frost and, dry conditions and things like that. We saw their production drop by over a third. And that really limited Russia's overall production. So that'll be something to watch. The cash market in Russia is not really necessarily reacting yet. So the traders aren't really paying too much attention to it. But it'll be something that we'll want to be watching as we work our way closer to harvest. So lots of weather things. We even have Argentina flooding, some problems there. It is pushing Brazilian basis a little bit higher and creating some uncertainty over, production down that way. The crop looks big still, but it looks like it might be junky, which is less than ideal. But great as a trader. If you're a trader, that's that's tons of opportunity.
Yeah.
Third point, here we got, obviously geopolitical news. We've got, Israel preparing to potentially attack Iran, which to me is more interesting just simply because if they completely ignore the U.S.'s requests, which the U.S. has said that they don't want them to do that, what does this mean? Overall, just
Yeah.
that's the question that I ask.
Do you know what? And funny you should raise, because I actually raised this in this morning's podcast that I did with Michael Brown, our morning
Yeah.
blast. One thing that it's been stand out over recent Israeli actions is like traditionally Israel would speak, they would like give the administration a heads up and say, by the way, we're
Yeah.
about to do this, be prepared for some fallout. But what we've noticed in recent kind of activities from Israel is that they're telling their kind of friendly nations after the event, and that also
Yes.
includes the US. And the US, this was under Biden as well as Trump. They are very obviously against this. They want to be given the heads up ahead of time. So I think
Yes.
it'll be interesting one if not only have the US and the Trump administration said, look, Israel, don't do this. There's other ways of going about this. We're trying all the other angles. Please don't attack the nuclear facilities. Not only will it be a kind of like two fingers up to the US if they go ahead and do this anyway, but the fallout on the response afterwards, because there's every chance that we'll know is at the same time the Trump administration finds out about it. So we'll be
Yes.
looking for the kind of the recourse from both, not just the Iranians and their friendly neighbors, but also from Israel's air quotes friendly nations. So it'll be a very interesting situation should it develop.
Especially considering they're kind of on the bubble as is with the situation in Gaza.
Yes,
Like you're hearing more,
exactly that.
and so it just, in a lot of people on the grain side will be like, why does that really matter? It matters when it comes to the dynamic in, geopolitics in general. Like
Yeah,
Israel has
no,
kind of been the
absolutely.
Middle Eastern, the apex of Middle Eastern relations too, to a certain extent. You know what I mean? And so like if that changes, what does the whole entire dynamic look like? Amongst all of, the entire region. And Egypt is a huge, wheat buyer and a
Yeah.
neighbor. And, obviously there's further implications when it comes to Gaza and some of these other things. And so well above my pay grade, but definitely something that we have to be paying attention to because it's pretty major. Zelensky is continuing to pressure the U.S. to put sanctions on Russia. He did remind President Trump today that basically, hey, Putin's been saying this, like he's just playing everyone. So we've seen a continuation of that. We've seen some interesting changes in like weaponry, like what we're using for weapons or what we're doing from attack standpoint. Like Russia is really using a lot more in the way of dummy drones, to overwhelm Ukraine's, air defense, which is already kind of limited. You know what I mean? And so they're really
Yeah.
kind of trying to do a lot of different things that I feel is almost like rolling over into mental warfare. But considering like Russia, like Putin's the king of gaslighting. Can you imagine being in a
Yeah. Oh
relationship
my
with
God.
him?
Yeah.
Like he is just like, he's the king of gaslighting. And so like the rest of the world is kind of gaslit to a certain extent. Now we're really pushing EU. They've got their 17th sanctions package. There's an 18th one. I will say it again and again. If you really want to bring the war to the end, you just have to kind of cripple them economically. Now is the time to do it. If you think that there isn't any inflation or whatever,
And
like, you know what
well,
I
this is
mean?
it,
Like,
right? And like
like
it ties in with what we've said. It ties in what we said with the sanctions. Sorry, with
yes.
tariffs. You go
Yeah.
hard on tariffs, it brings people to the table.
Yeah. I mean, it's not ideal. Like it causes a lot more in the way of confusion or gnashing of teeth or whatever very early on, but it's the only way. Like if they cut off their ability to export grains, if they cut off their ability to export oil, if they start sanctioning those who are doing business with Russia, I would bet you that they'd be at the negotiating table and we probably have a ceasefire within 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, no,
Just my
absolutely.
thought. And I'm not a geopolitical expert. I just graduated from liberal arts college with an English degree, and smoked a lot of reefer. So maybe I have no idea. Anyway, point 4, grain flows we'll be watching. Just kind of paying attention to what's going on. We got to pay attention to Brazil. A lot of folks have been like, why does the Brazil bird flu situation matter? Really just matters because if you start to see them reduce their poultry population because of their inability to export, Brazil relies on a lot of exports of poultry. And so that's what supported their market. If you see them reduce their poultry population because of their inability to export, it'll obviously reduce their corn needs in the short term. Now this could go one of two ways. The market could get shitty enough that the traders just determine that they're going to hold on to it because there's a carrot in front of them. There's obvious demand, long-term demand, and the demand will recover from the bird flu. It's early enough in the season. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those
Yeah.
things where it's like, if it happens this early, in 6 months, we'll probably be on the other side of it and we'll have, a return of corn demand, yada, yada, yada. As a trader, you just have to kind of decide at that point, do I buy buy a bunch of cheap shit on the front end and not push it into the pipeline, or do I buy it, push it into the pipeline, and not risk it getting cheaper later on? And so that's where we're at right now with Brazil. Just an uncertainty of what it's going to be worth in another 30 days, right? Just if we see a continuation of bird flu discovery, then it's going to be bad for exports. If we are able to see them kind of limit the spread, then I think it's going to be okay. They are investigating 6 additional cases, which the headline in and of itself is kind of scary, but honestly, it's not. There's 2 commercial flocks and then 4 backyards that they're looking at. And so that'll be the thing that we'll want to pay attention to there. And then lastly, there was one more thing, and it was super cool, and it was going to be funny, and now I can't remember it, so you're just going to have to. Oh man, that's why you didn't save the ketchup joke for this morning. I know now.
Exactly.
I know now, because if it goes away, it's super sad. Oh, in context, it actually isn't funny. You might read an article. You might read an article about Japan's farm minister resigning this morning because he said he never had to buy rice or whatever. At first I was kind of like, is this a tariff thing? Are we talking trade? Like, is this something because he's pissed that they're going to make him buy rice? And then it turns out it's just actually conspiracy, or, he said as a joke, like, thanks to the lobbyists, I never have to buy rice. And like right now, apparently Japan has had a surge in rice prices, which is interesting in and of itself. And a lot of people are kind of angry because their food costs have gone up, and bro over there is just like, I'm a washing rice. And so Scrooge McDuck style diving into pools of rice over there, and pissed people off. So he no longer has a job. But that's it. Just in context. I feel like context is important. And so that's your last little tidbit of the day. Otherwise,
Awesome.
market-wise, strength will be open 27 minutes. We'll see what the day brings.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, as usual, Angie. Listeners, thank you as always for listening. We really do appreciate you. Tune in for more from myself and Angie tomorrow. Take care. Much love.
We'll see you later, guys.